right. Are you ready?
Ready.
Everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Shop and Chivalry podcast. I'm here with my friend today, Shon Ellerby. How are you doing?
Hi there. Good morning. I'm good.
So what brings you in today? You're running for something, right?
I am running for Circuit Court Judge for Jackson, George, and Greene Counties.
Okay, 3 counties. All right.
Yes,
Well, I want to dive into that much more. Consider me an idiot. I know nothing about the circuit court.
Okay.
So you're going to be able to inform me on those things. But let's start with you. Who are you?
So I am Shon Ellerby. I am a local attorney. I live in Ocean Springs with my husband and my 2 kids. I'm a transplant, sort of. I was a military kid. So my parents are from Jeff Davis County, which is a major metropolitan area that includes Bassfield and Prentiss, Mississippi. My dad joined the Navy. And so we moved along the East Coast, a little bit in the central part, nowhere really exotic. But he spent most of his career on the East Coast in Virginia, Norfolk, Virginia. So I grew up in Virginia Beach.
Yeah. I spent some time in Norfolk. Great town, great downtown. You've got the ships in the background. There's a nice little, cityscape there. So, yeah, I had an absolute blast. So, okay, so from Mississippi, all right?
Yes.
Where did your study lead you? I mean, did you want to be in law when you're in high school? I mean, where did that originate from?
The only thing I can say is God, because ever since I can remember, I wanted to become an attorney. And so when I graduated from law school, a lot of my friends would say, you always told us you were going to be an attorney, like friends that I had grown up with. And I'm like, I was talking about it like way back then.
Oh, wow.
So I always said that I wanted to do it. There were no attorneys in my family. Mm-hmm. The only thing this is, when you're running for office, you analyze everything you've done in life.
Oh yeah, because it's under a magnifying glass, and you'd like to think that nobody can judge you as harshly as you can judge yourself. But politics remind us that, man, some people can really dive deep into these things.
Right, and you're thinking about everywhere you've been and what you've done. So I grew up in the time of the Cosby Show. And so Claire Huxtable was an attorney, and she spoke Spanish. So I'm an attorney, and I majored in Spanish, and I speak some rusty Spanish. And so I'm like, is that where that came from?
Who knows? Who knows? We're so influenced, especially as kids, because we absorb everything. We're so influenced by things around us. I mean, who knows where that originally came from? So you went to college for
Spanish and psychology.
Spanish
I
and
went to
psychology.
University of Virginia. Okay. So I was in Virginia up until 9 years ago. I moved here to marry my husband, Clifford. He's from Moss Point. He had moved away after high school, but came back and got a job for Chevron. So we had connected. So I have family on the coast. We would come and spend time on the coast during the summers, during holidays. And so the short story is, my cousin was dating his brother, so I met him, and anyways, we connected, disconnected, reconnected, disconnected, and then finally we reconnected and never disconnected.
Well, that's great. So why Virginia then? I mean, so you could have gone to college anywhere. Why in Virginia?
Very simple answer. So my dad was able to get in-state residency. I think he had been a Mississippi resident up until that time for tax purposes. But I think, and I'd have to ask him to confirm, but because we had lived there so long, we went through some kind of process and I was able to get in-state tuition.
Yeah.
So very, very practical reason.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I've got plenty of friends who, when I was stationed out in California, they were staying in California purely for the benefit of their kids being able to go to college and stay for free if they retired out of there. I mean, so yeah. I mean, that's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why you didn't, go to college back here. So when you decided to get into law, did you know what kind of law you wanted to practice?
I did not. So after undergrad, I took some time off. About 3 years, and I got a job just at a local law firm. I came home, lived at home, and got a job as a receptionist.
Okay.
I had to figure out how I was going to pay for law school, but I took some time off. And that was the first time I actually saw attorneys up close and personal and what they did and how law practice worked. Now I look back, I learned a lot about how to run an office, really. And so it came time, okay, I gotta apply to law school if I'm going to go. And so there's a school in Virginia Beach, Regent University School of Law, and they had a part-time night program. So I thought, well, I'll apply just to have an option, and I got in. So when I got in, I go into one of the partners, and I'm like, look, oh my God, like I got in. And so he looked at me and he said, well, you don't have to leave. You can stay and work here. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then we can do something else. And so that's what I did. I enrolled in Regent's part-time law program, and I worked during the day. So I would work 9 to 5, and then I would scoot over to the law school. I think it was like 6:30 to 9, 6:30 to 9:30, and take my classes at night.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that takes quite the commitment. I mean, it seems at least in society, we're trying to find a way for kids not to take that on. And I kind of worry that we're not developing like the hardened youth to take on, their adult lives by making it too easy for them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, okay, so I have kids. I have a 6 and a 3-year-old. And so, life gets better with every generation. Like my parents made my life better than their parents made their life. Our kids' lives are going to be better than our parents made our lives. But you're right. I'm like, how do we find the balance so that they have a good work ethic, they don't take things for granted? How do you not give them everything when you can? And I think you just don't. Even as an adult, sometimes I'm just like, you don't have to buy everything that you want.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to buy everything that you want. And so I think it takes a conscious effort to say, okay, if you want that, you're going to have to, if you want money for ice cream, you're going to have to pick up all your toys or something like that. Right. I don't know. I'm still figuring it out.
Right. Well, I think we all are. And unfortunately, so we live in society where also things are, like, people want to show what they have through social media and everything else. And so by not showing it, it's almost like we're organized people into the haves and have-nots. And maybe that's probably why these issues are so prevalent. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that it is a problem,
No, sure. I mean, you can kind of get sucked into the social media and think everybody's doing whatever it is. Yeah. And they're really not, but it just appears that way. I think what helps too with my kids, I'm a little bit of an older mom. Okay. So I'm 43. And so I'm also at a point where I'm like, I am who I am, and it is what it is. Like, you can take me as I am, but I'm not really trying to impress anyone. But I think that comes with age a little bit too. So
how has social media been for you during the campaign?
So it's definitely, it's a tool compared to, back in the day. I'm like, I don't know how people launched campaigns because all you had was like television. Yeah. Which is super expensive. And so it's cool, but you kind of have to do the same thing because you can get caught up in like what someone else is doing, but you also can look at what people are doing in other states and get other ideas of things. So my sister and I always say that like we live in both worlds. So we remember the world before social media or before the internet, I guess, really. Yeah. And we know what the world is like now. And so it's kind of trying to find the balance, but there's still people who don't really do social media, surprise, surprise, or who don't go online. I met somebody who doesn't have an email address. Oh. Who's never had an email account. And I make fun of my brother-in-law because he has a Hotmail account. Well, but like, it's almost one of those things. How can you possibly live? Like, I can't imagine. Like, how do you bank? How do you, like, there's so many things. I mean, I'm not sure that you can get a power bill, without an email address. Everything requires an email address, I think, or at least in our worlds. Yeah. Ooh, they must have a lot of time. Yeah, I don't know. Or they live somewhere in some bunker and who knows? They're just waiting for the end of times. Who knows? But very interesting. Yeah. But yeah, I think social media has been a great tool, especially for someone who's trying to launch a grassroots campaign, because you can use it to reach younger people. That's kind of been one of the things I've tried to figure out, just how to get young people engaged and care about all of it, not just me, but all of it. Voting, knowing what's going on in your community, researching candidates for yourself. So I think it's a great tool, but you also kind of you still have to like stay focused because it could be a full-time job by itself. Well, I think one of the problems with social media is that, when it comes to politics, people just kind of pay attention to the level of politics that least affects them, at the national level. And the reality is that the design of the system, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, you should be putting the majority of your effort towards positions like yours. Absolutely.
within your city council, you should disproportionately have your energy the closer to you. I mean, that makes the most sense. The people in closest proximity to you are going to know most likely what you need, and they're going to be able to advocate for you. It seems like a tough thing to compete for that advertising space, we'll say, or that social media space.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess national politics are more on people's minds because they have the big budgets, and you see them all the time. But yeah, the local elections are the ones that matter and most directly affect your life. Especially here on the coast, we have such a close-knit community here. You might go to Walmart and actually see someone who's elected to office, and they're picking out their tomatoes or whatever. So I think we have a great opportunity here because you can actually reach out and touch your politicians.
Yeah.
But like district attorney, I was an assistant district attorney. That's a position that directly impacts everyone, whether you're in trouble, out of trouble. That goes directly to public safety.
Yeah.
And what happens in your communities. Circuit court judge, same thing. The judge is in a different role because the judge is pronouncing sentence. But, because a lot of people say, well, I don't really know a lot about that, or how does that affect my life? And I'm like, it directly affects your life because the sentences that are given there on the criminal side affect how safe your community is.
Yeah.
And your ideals about what should be happening in our justice system.
Well, and I think if you want to look at a case that's close to home as to how wrong your elected officials can get things, I think look no farther than Jackson. Jackson's going through a rough time, the water crisis, now the garbage crisis. So it's possible for a city apparatus to become less functional than ideal. And, it's important that we do pay attention to those things for sure. But so let's start this. So you get out of college, right?
Yep.
And you've got your law degree, right? Mm-hmm. Fancy lawyer here.
Yes.
What do you do then? What's the first job you take and why?
So I actually stayed at that same firm where I worked through law schools. I passed the bar, and they offered me the opportunity to join as an associate. So literally started from the bottom. Now I'm here, right?
There you go.
Receptionist to attorney, like the whole ladder.
Yeah, I love it.
And so I did that for a while. I worked for some really good attorneys there. Like they were well respected, brilliant. I realize now I learned a lot about how to be an attorney, how to interact with the court, how to interact with colleagues, how to interact with support staff. I learned a great deal that I didn't realize I was getting at the time, So, but I wanted to really hone my trial advocacy skills. I wanted to be good in court. So I started to do research. I researched my boss. I researched, all the famous attorneys that I could think of. And what I saw was they had either been prosecutors or public defenders. And so I was like, oh, well, that's what I need to go do. And that's what I did. So there were two positions. And at this point, I'm still in Virginia. So I applied for a job at the prosecutor's office, and I applied for a job at the public defender's office.
Willing to do either one? You didn't have a particular...
either one. No, I just wanted to be in court because the skills that you gain just in 2 years at an office like that, it sets you up. You're appearing in front of the same judges. You're interacting with the same attorneys. And so you are just learning, probably really from repetition, honestly, but you are learning so much because you got to get in there and go. Like nobody's holding your hand. They give you a stack of files. Somebody might be with you for about a week, and then you got to go. Yeah. You got to go handle it. And so I got interviews for both jobs, and I actually got offered the public defender job, but I was really impressed with the prosecutor's office. And it was the first time that I had gone on a job interview and was impressed with the job itself, which probably sounds weird, but
but that's something that most people shy away from in an interview because you've got to interview the place you're going to work for because you're about to give them 40 hours a week.
Right.
You don't want to be miserable there, so there's certainly something to that.
But I walked out and I was like, that is the job that I want. So I turned down the public defender job and prayed really, really hard that I would get the job at the prosecutor's office, and it did. It came through. I think I screamed in my about-to-be boss's ear, and I was like, I'm sorry, but I'm like really excited about this. And I think what it was this idea that prosecutors were in there to do justice. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really, although I had gone to law school and college and thought I was a pretty well-educated young person, I didn't know that about prosecution. I didn't know that there was this noble aspect to it. I think I probably had the perception that, like, they just lock people up. And so I remember one of the things he told me when I got the job is, I'm hiring you to make judgments. You're going to be prepared. You're going to know the facts of your case. You're going to know the law. But when you're in court, you're going to have to make judgments right there on the spot. And so as long as you are making good judgments, you'll be fine with me. But that's what I'm hiring you to do. And that it stayed with me.
Yeah, that's amazing. So getting ready to do some of these interviews, one of the questions I've thought about, well, what is a judge? And, we've talked before, we got started, I like to dive into the metaphysical, and it's like, well, I think at its root, an ideal is a judge. Everything that's an ideal. I don't know if you've been to somebody's house and somebody has a room that you're not allowed to go in. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. It's pretty. You may have one of those rooms. I don't know, but what that room is it's perfect always. Right? And it's reserved for something very important. Well, that room is a judge on the rest of the house. It shows the rest of the house what it could be. We love athletes, right? For the things that they can do, but athletes are manifestations of ourselves. So it's impressive to see that we are that person. We could be that person. And what's great about a judge is that when we know that we have the potential to be, when we fall short of that, that's the judgment on ourselves. And so they're self-evident judges.
Wow. That's deep.
Right. Cool
That's
stuff,
deep.
right?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool stuff. And so when I hear that you were told, hey, I'm hiring you to make judgments, you're the one who casts judgment, to some degree you're either by agency or he saw something in you, you're an ideal.
Well, and
that's quite a weight to carry.
It is, and I think I had this sense, most of my career I've worked for elected officials, and so I always had this sense that even when I wasn't at work and I was in the community, that I had to conduct myself a certain way, because I go in court and I recommend sentences to the judge for people, or I recommend whether a person should be allowed to go on bond. And so, not that I had to be perfect, but I just had to make really good choices so that I didn't find myself in a situation where someone was judging me.
Right. Well, and that's the burden, I think, of being a judge is that, and of course this, I mean this literally, because that's what you're going into, is that, to be the person within a community who officially casts judgment. I mean, then you're at risk of being judged yourself always. And
Sure.
and that's just politicians in general. I mean, that's quite the weight. And so the question is, why would anybody decide to campaign to be a judge?
Because I think I have something to offer.
Okay. There you go.
So really, so going back to just early in my career, I saw judges who used their positions for good. So they were good judges in court. They treated everyone with respect, from the defendant to defense attorney, court-appointed attorney versus retained attorney, treated everyone with respect. Mm-hmm. But they also used their good to make impact on the system. Mm-hmm. And I think I always said, if I'm ever a judge, that's what I'm going to do. And so back when I was in Norfolk, so I stayed there for 5 years before I ended up coming to Mississippi. But one of the last things I did there was this, my boss at that time had this idea about community prosecution. So we were in Norfolk. Crime was high. There was a lot of violent crime. There was a lot of mistrust of the police for historical reasons. We had, issues with witnesses wanting to cooperate in prosecutions so that we could get the people who had historically done very bad things in the community. It was difficult to successfully prosecute those people because people were scared and they didn't trust the system. And so my boss had this idea. It was kind of twofold. It started with juveniles. So if we could proactively go as prosecutors, go into the school and talk to young people about choices. I think the program was called Choices. Mm-hmm. Because what was happening is, and it's funny, it kind of started happening here on the coast too, before I left the DA's office. If we could tell them, hey, this is the consequences of being in the car, the getaway car for the armed robbery. that happens. You're going to be just as guilty as the person who went in the store with the gun. So if we could, and you're going to be tried as an adult. If we could maybe educate young people, maybe we could prevent them from becoming that file where we had to make decisions that completely altered their futures. On the flip side, he also had this idea of getting prosecutors into the community. So he opened a satellite office that was down in the heart of the city, which was easy for people to get to. It was also in this center where you could go and take care of other business. So it was easy for people to get to. The prosecutors dressed down when they were in that office. And then the other component was, at that time they were called therapeutic courts. I think they're called alternative courts now. It changes depending on what the theory is.
Sure.
But the idea was we could reduce recidivism if we addressed the issues that fueled criminal behavior, talking about nonviolent offenders. Mm-hmm. So he put me in this role. So I was a prosecutor that was going to be in charge of drug court, mental health court. I was going to create a new program called reentry court, which eventually led to helping create a veterans treatment court. Mm-hmm. And when I got there, I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And the idea was that we looked at a person and we targeted those issues that fueled their criminal behavior. So if you needed a GED, you got a GED. I mean, we got people teeth so they could have self-esteem. We taught them, about computer skills, and not just me. It was a multidisciplinary team. So we had the people at the table whose expertise was in those areas. And so, but a lot of it, the judges were behind it. They were behind getting these programs started and brought people to the table to cooperate and do these things. And man, I'm telling you, it was an awesome thing to see.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
Go ahead. Sorry.
We saw people, rebuild their lives. They regained the trust of their families. They got their kids back. They got jobs. They became contributing members of society. And some of them were kind of old. And the reentry court program, the idea was that this is your last chance to get it right on this side of the bars. So if not, there'll be a reservation for you and you will probably die in prison because of your life's choices. And so I saw judges who thought outside the box, who kind of stayed on the forefront of what was happening. Not that they went with every whim, but they paid attention to what research said about what was effective and what worked. And so I was like, wow, you can really make a difference in the world. You really, truly can. And so I guess that was kind of my inspiration, that if I ever get the chance to be a judge, that's the kind of judge I want to be.
So it seems like you had to move away to get that perspective and move to a larger urban area, a more densely populated area. And of course that makes sense. I mean, purely from the point of probability, right? So sure. More people are organized in cities. Issues are, crimes are scalable because people involved are scalable. All these problems are far more complex by orders of magnitude. And
sure.
And as a result, the solutions have to be as complex by orders of magnitude. And it strikes me as that you wouldn't have gotten the same experience had you stayed here in Mississippi or gotten out of college and come right back here because we don't have those same scalable problems. Seems like it's a unique advantage that you have.
Sure. I mean, and honestly, so my parents are from little itty bitty towns. I mean, back in the day, well, one, I'm probably related to most of the people there, but you picked up the phone and you just dialed the last four digits of the phone number you were inside an office. And so my dad, as I look back, his joining the military, which took us away from here, actually exposed my sister and I to way more than he would have been able to on his own, he and my mom. And really both of them, because they left home when they were probably 21, 22. And so they probably would not, just based upon where they were from and being poor and not having the resources, they couldn't have done that on their own.
Yeah.
So, God always has a plan. And so yes, I went there not thinking that I would ever live in Mississippi. Now, I always wanted to come back here and live when I was little because I wanted to live in Bassfield, first of all, go to school with my cousins, and play in the woods in the country where, there were no strangers,
right.
you know, because I grew up in the 80s. So there was like, say no to drugs, stranger danger, like don't get in the strange car.
Yeah, but you also had Deliverance in Virginia. So I'm not sure which the right decision is. You know what I mean? Like you went to where the problem might have. I'm kidding.
But when we would come down to Bassfield, like we would just go outside and play, and like we saw no other people.
Yeah. And right. Well, I'll tell you, I think your concept of danger is kind of flawed as a kid too. Look, I used to swim over on Ocean Springs Road. There's a boatyard there, and that was abandoned when I was in high school. We would swim across the bayou, right, to a rope swing, jump off a rope swing that was poorly put together. Once in a while, getting fights with St. Martin kids over the rope swing.
Sure.
But I'll tell you what, I would never swim in that bayou. You know, today,
now,
like there's gators, everything else in there. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sure. Like I go back now and I'm like, because we used to cut across like one uncle's cow pasture. It was just a little bit of strip, but we would cut across the cow pasture to go to the uncle's house. And I'm like, where were all the snakes? You know, now I'm aware of snakes and lizards and like all these things. And I'm like, where were those things? We used to play outside in the darkness, hide and seek, freeze tag. Like they had the one yard light.
Yeah.
But I guess it's the blissful ignorance of youth, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. It was so nice, but it's interesting how that ignorance sort of incubates us and incubates us enough to allow us to explore.
Right.
Because had we been that scared, would we have explored?
That's
right. So it kind of permits for some courage. You know, hearing your story and leaving. I'm inspired by, because that's kind of what I did, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. When I left for 10, 12 years. In that time, I went to more than 50 countries, 6 continents. I'm involved in everything from the Pakistan flood to the Haiti earthquake, multiple times in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan. Been in aircraft that have taken RPG fire on the ground during mortar strikes, whatever. But I come back and I look around, and in many ways things have stayed the same. And in many ways, I didn't feel like I was part of the same thing that's evolved, right? But I also think that the perspective that I've brought back has been better equipped to deal with the challenges, especially from a global perspective, than people that have stayed here. And I bring this up to say, I think it's easy in small communities, and I'm from Ocean Springs.
Right.
You know, you're from a small community. You can point people out that aren't from there on a map, right? Like, you know.
Right.
And so it's easy for us when it comes to these elected positions to say, oh, well, you weren't from here the whole time.
Right.
Why are you running for this? And so from my perspective, it's like, well, I bring something literally unique that is not from here, you know, to this community. What would you say to that critique of yourself, since you spent a lot of your time working in Virginia, you went to college up there, you left Mississippi, and now you're back working, been working, and looking to run for an elected position?
So I used to always hear my mom say this to my dad. You know, my dad was always like, I want to go back to Mississippi. Like, I'm going to go live in the country and have a garden. And so she would say, we can do that, but when we go back, we need to bring something back. We need to come back and make it better than we left it. And I'm kind of just realizing while I'm talking to you, it kind of got in me. I heard her say it countless times. So when my husband proposed and it was clear that I was coming to live in Mississippi, because people in Virginia would ask me, like, why are you doing that? Like, why would you go there?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, no, it's not what you think. Like,
I'm constantly in defense of Mississippi.
I'm like, I'm going to the Gulf Coast. It's totally
my air code's
different.
going to be 228, okay? It's going to be 228.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there was like this more, I think, than I realized. Even when I was younger, and I would say, we're going to Mississippi for the holidays, and we were like so pumped. And people would kind of look. But I was like, Mississippi is home, and it's going to be home. And if it's going to be my home, I'm going to make it home. I'm going to contribute. I'm going to be a part of that community. I was going to come here and say, oh, y'all just do everything just so wrong. Now, there's definitely a transition. The seasons, for example. It took me a while to realize that I wasn't going to need all my coats. my coat collection that I had developed.
Yeah. You definitely had a Northern Vacation section in your closet pretty quick.
Oh, my goodness. You know, my husband, he would look at me and he'd be like, "You gonna be hot." And I'm like, "I'm going for a look." And surely I'd be sweating later, but I thought I looked cute.
Yeah.
So there was definitely a transition, but I think, and I've met people even before I started running who either came from other places and they fall in love with the area. It took a little bit getting used to seeing people that you knew all the time, or, you know, being within less than 6 degrees of people. But it's kind of nice too, especially being a military kid where I went to different schools. You know, although we stayed in Virginia Beach, but we moved to different military housing communities, and my parents eventually purchased a home. So I've been at a lot of schools, maybe not as much as some, but I look at our children and I'm like, gosh, her friends that she's with now, barring someone moving, she'll be with them her whole high school, you know, all the way through high school. And so that there's something kind of cool about that too.
Yeah.
And so, but I also feel like it almost discounts that someone from somewhere else, one, can love this place the way that natives do, but also that we don't have something to contribute as well. And so the way I look at it is, say you're working on a project, right? Or when I was in the DA's office, there were several attorneys, and sometimes we would debrief cases. So I have this case, I've been working on it, like I've read it, I know it backwards and forwards, and we would throw it out to the group. And someone would chime in and ask a question about something that I had never thought of, that I had a complete blind spot to that issue. Someone else would say, well, have you thought about this? And you're like, well, wow, I haven't thought about that. And so what I realized is our perceptions, our diversity of perception, if you will, enhances what we produce. It enhances the product that you put out, because I was a better lawyer in trial because my colleagues threw out ideas that I could anticipate or that I maybe would have missed had I not had their perspective. And so I think it's the same here, that we enhance what this state has to offer by taking on perspectives from people like you who've served our country and have been everywhere, and you've seen what works, what doesn't work. I think that we all come together, and isn't that what America is? Like, isn't that what we do?
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, there's 50 experiments, you know, going on in this nation all the time, and that's the point. I mean, I would make the case that the most American thing you can do is explore the country in its different experiments, and then you know, aggregate everything down into you know, what's best suitable for us, given the context of our people, our culture, everything else. I mean, I think that's the right thing to do. And, you know, just to throw out a quote there, when you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at change, right? I think that's C.T. Fletcher. But so being able to look at things differently from a different perspective certainly changes them. You know, it takes problems and scales them properly. It gives better solutions. I mean, and the thing is, that's true about everything. You know, we could look at this and I can ask you, what color is this, right? You could say brown. I could say wood. I could say black. I see white. I see yellow. Who's wrong? You know, but the thing is, it's all of those things and none of those things. And in order to share those ideas and get the most effective, most appropriate answer out there to derive solutions for, you've got to be able to talk to people. You've got to be able to take in global perspectives, and somebody that is from here has been curated by here. You're limited by here, you know. Sure,
but then you can help me learn, because coming here, so I started my career in Virginia, and so I came here, and people were like, what's that like? And I equate it to learning a different language. So you kind of, you know what you want to do, you know what you're trying to say, you just got to figure out how to say it, how to communicate it. But I learned from my colleagues who were from here, had been here, okay, this is how we do this, because we practiced in Jackson, George, and Greene counties. And so George County is different from Jackson County. Greene County is different from George County and different from Jackson County. And so not that you changed, but you were respectful of the customs and the cultures when you went to those courthouses is primarily my experience. You know, you knew certain things didn't work there, but I learned that from my colleagues who are from there, who are from here, who taught me how to acclimate and how to fit in, if you will, here.
Well, and I think one of the problems that you run into when you say like, oh, well, they're not from here, well, then you start to, I think the follow-up question has to be, well, what does it mean to be from here? You know, what is it that you're looking for? And the problem with definition is limitation. And so there's an idea that I listened to a lecture on the difference between polytheism and monotheism. And one of the big differences, one of the great ideas to shift from polytheism to monotheism was the idea that, one, gods were created in polytheism, right? So if you were going on if the sun was beaten down in on your crops and you were a Greek, you would pray to Hephaestus to stop, bringing so much beating down sun on your crops, right? But if you were going to sail the ocean, Hephaestus wouldn't do anything for you. So by being the god of the sun, you're also limited to the god of the sun. And then the rise of monotheism became no longer the created, but the creator. And so what defines the creator? Well, nothing. They're the ones that actually create, right? And therefore there is no limitation in there. And so by deciding what it means to be from here, you're limiting the perspective to only those things. And if you want the most out of your community, you can't have it, because the most would be that which transcends the current definition. Wow, that's deep. It's something. Yeah. It's something.
But yeah, I mean, it's like people kind of want to define you and put you into like this section, but that's not really true to who we are. Like we are these.
It's cheap too.
Right. We are dynamic. We evolve as people. Who I was at 23 is not who I am at 43, or my views. I'm still the same person, but how I see the world now is not the same way that I saw the world at 23, but my life has also changed. I'm married. I have kids. I live in the South. I've lived 20 more years. And so that has influenced how I see the world versus when I was 23 and I don't even know what I had to worry about back then. If I had something to wear.
Right.
To wherever I was going.
Yeah, who knows? Well, I mean, at that time your problems are just different,
Right.
You've just got different problems. But so okay, so you've got all these experience in Virginia. You've got some great influences from this particular prosecutor. So you're leaning into this, I'm hiring you to be a judge kind of concept, right? So what challenges were brought to you that you faced, that you bring to the table in Virginia? And then we're going to talk more about coming back to Mississippi after that.
Okay. So my first prosecutor job, I was the domestic violence prosecutor. I was on a grant. And so what that meant was Monday through Thursday, it was in juvenile domestic relations court. I handled misdemeanor and felony domestic violence charges. And that very quickly helped you develop your judgment skills, because what I saw very quickly is, so on Monday I would have a file and I would have a defendant and a victim, and then Thursday I would have a file and they would switch roles. Or, I was having to figure out what truly were domestic violence crimes or domestic violence issues versus people who were abusing the system. But I also always had in the back of my mind that these types of cases also become lethal and ended up becoming fatalities, because that was another thing that I was able to do, is participate in these multidisciplinary teams where, and it depended on topics. So I did one for domestic violence, and I think I did one for violent crime also. But the stakeholders in the system would take a file that was closed, had been, fully prosecuted or whatever happened with it, and would unpack what happened to see what the gaps were, to figure out how we could get better. And so as a young prosecutor, they would have us participate in these, I think, to make us see how even though we were low-level, entry-level prosecutors, but to show us how our work connected up to we had teams there, what the violent crime teams were doing. And so it was very effective, because I kind of always had that in the back of my mind, that the decisions that I was making could literally be a matter of life or death.
Life or death, yeah.
At times. And so we would rotate through different topics. So I went to a different team, and the idea was that you were learning different skills in each of these teams that you went to, but the volume was high. I mean, we were in court every day, basically, unless you marked off your calendar to not be in court. So we were in the lower courts, we were preparing cases for jury trials, we were having bench trials, and so I learned very quickly how to manage volume, how to make decisions, values-based decisions, but also to move cases efficiently, because that was also another issue. You couldn't sit there and, languish over your files because they were coming in as fast as you were getting them out. And so I think that was one of the reasons, going back to, you should go to a prosecutor's office or a public defender's office. People always say that's like some of the best experience you can get, because you are learning so much so quickly. And so I think it helped me learn how to evaluate cases more quickly. We were in teams too, so you kind of specialized in an area for about 2 to 3 years, so you could tell whether a case was good or bad very quickly, because you were doing that day in and day out. It helped me judge credibility of witnesses. I built relationships with law enforcement, because initially they're looking at you like, this little girl is telling me my case is bad, but I've been doing this longer.
Right. Is that particularly challenging as a woman? I mean, because it seems when you're dealing with police, I mean, police are a male-dominated field.
Sure.
There's a lot of bravado in there. I think the heroes in movies and film and TV, they're kind of these strong characters or whatever. Is that a challenge, being a...
I think it's twofold. Being a woman and also being young or looking like you're young. I've definitely felt times that I had to prove myself, but I knew that like that day would come. Like I always tried to be respectful, because I did know, even going into law practice, like my secretary had done it longer than I had, so if she brought something to my attention, I wasn't dismissive to say, I'm the lawyer,
Right.
I was like, she knows, and I learned very early. I had a trial that went badly. And my secretary kept saying, there's something off about this case. And I said, I know, but I don't know what it is. And she was like, I'm telling you, Shon, something's not right. And I mean, 2 days later in trial, we realized that our victim was a complete liar. But I learned, and that was early in my career, I learned very early, like, listen to the people who necessarily don't have all the credentials and the pedigree or whatever, because they've got the experience and you can learn from them. So it was kind of the same thing with law enforcement. I always try to be respectful, to say, well, this is what the law says, this is what we have, and this is what I think is going to happen. And then there were times that I just had to say, okay, we'll put it in front of the judge and we'll let the judge decide. And then the judge would do what I predicted was going to happen. And so the next time, I didn't have to teach the lesson or huff off or get mad. The next time I earned their trust that way.
Right.
They were like, okay, she might kind of know what she's talking about.
Might be something to this one.
But I think respect,
because you're on the same team.
We are.
Yeah.
Or we were. I mean, I'm not a prosecutor anymore, but we were. But I learned that I earned the respect of some of those detectives, because I think I dealt with them respectfully.
Any challenge? Any cases stick out that are particularly tough, or that you that you can discuss? And feel free not to. We can move on.
Yeah. So I think it's okay. So there's a few. So early in my career, I did juvenile court, and so it was juveniles who were committing crimes, but a lot of times there were some underlying issues that were getting at that,
There's no way, when it comes to, in my view, and I don't have the experience or credibility to make the statement, but I'm stating, I'm saying it anyway. I would be hard pressed to be convinced that there's not underlying issues as to why a juvenile is committing a crime in society. You know?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. There's always a story of some sort or some failure in some way in their lives. But there's a case that I remember. Okay, so I'm going to talk about two cases. The two times that I kind of cried in court. which you're not supposed to do because there's no crying in baseball, but I did. So I was in juvenile court, and there's this kid who he hadn't done anything like really bad, but he was stealing cars. Like, and those young people, they could steal cars like nobody's business. And so, but he had some other issues. I think he had maybe bipolar diagnosis, some major diagnosis. And they had tried to place him. His mom had drug problems. I don't remember where Dad was, but they had tried to put him with a family member, and this family member comes in court, and she's like, I just can't. I can't deal with him. I'm giving him back. And so I'm sitting here, and I'm a very young person at that point, but I'm like, and this child is sitting here. And so I see him kind of sitting there, and he's trying to like look all tough, like he's not affected. But I could see like, a tear starting to come out of his eye. And so it wasn't my courtroom, so I couldn't do anything, but I'm sitting there like, we have to make this stop. Like, he cannot sit here and hear everyone talk about how he's not wanted. And so the judge is asking the social worker, well, what can we do? And so they're trying to, and he's sitting there. And, on paper, he was this bad kid, right? Like, he's just out here breaking the law. But when I looked over at him, I'm like, he's a kid who has been failed in every way. And so I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to cry. And I think my supervisor was in the courtroom that day, and I'm like, oh my God. So the judge takes a break to figure out something. And so I like beeline out of the courtroom because I'm like, I cannot, I have to be professional. I can't cry. But that was the first time I think that my heart was tender. And I was still very young, but my heart has remained tender and all this. So we'll fast forward. So now I'm in Mississippi, and I get this case, and it's old. Defendant had been indicted. It was a child sexual abuse case, but he moved away, so we didn't get him served. So and everyone has moved away. Like, she lived between mom and dad, and the abuse would happen when she was here. She made her disclosure in a different state altogether. So my witnesses were everywhere. There was a local investigator here, but that person had left their police department. And so it was time to have a trial. So this was before we were doing Zoom and FaceTime. This was in recent history, but we didn't FaceTime. I don't know why. I guess we just hadn't realized we could do that yet. And so I'm literally preparing with witnesses over the phone. I think I did FaceTime my victim because she was young, and so I wanted to see her and see how she did. But I'm sending her things. It was totally non-traditional, and it's trial prep, but this case had to go to trial. The first time that I saw all of my witnesses in person was the week that trial was starting.
Oh, wow.
So it was wild, and I didn't realize I believed this child. I believed that this had happened to her. And she was doing well. She was in college, and she had overcome. But she was another child who, didn't have the best childhood. Just had could have had a better life growing up. And so I really wanted to get justice for her. But there were so many challenges, getting to it, right? And so the thing when you're going into court is, you want to know how your witnesses are going to do when they get on the stand. So we've talked to people on the phone, so we're talking to them. My partner and I, we're meeting with them, leading up to before trial starts, and we're making judgments. Like, do we call this witness? Do we don't? Like, I don't know how she's going to do, because we're trying to put our best foot forward, because this is the only chance the state has.
Knowing that the other attorney's going to have an opportunity to talk to them as well, right?
Yeah,
so that's part of it.
So I'm like, I really want to get justice for this young woman. And then, how's the jury going to look at the state that this case has taken so long to come to trial? Are they going to judge the case based upon, the process of the system? And so he was convicted. And so it came time for sentencing, and I stood up and I went to speak, and emotion came out of my mouth. That's the only way I can describe it. And it caught me off guard, because I remember I kind of shook my head okay, get back. But I think it was I was so overcome with the fact that I was able to get justice for this victim. Although justice seemed like it was delayed, it was ultimately not denied. And so those are kind of the two big moments. And at that point, I had been practicing for a while, and I was like, wow, I still feel. Like, I still feel. Because you can become kind of clinical, you know, like, after a while. And you kind of have to compartmentalize so that you don't, you know, so that you can maintain your own mental health in doing that kind of work. But I always thought that was something, like, I always had feelings. I always, and I still do. You know, if I think about something too long now, I can, you know, feel my voice crack a little bit sometimes.
Well, you're taking on issues that affect, you know, lives of so many people. I mean, and if, you know, these trials can take too long, then there's a perspective out there, I'm sure you're aware of, that you run the risk of re-victimizing somebody who's reached closure, you know, and then God forbid they uncover something during that trial that they didn't realize was there, you know, and so now it's like, okay, now we have to reclose this, but then also we got this whole new issue to deal with. I mean, so it's and maybe that's why, you know, there's that saying, you can't legislate ethics.
Right.
You know, like it's tough. I mean, you've got this code of laws, and you hope that there's a moral impetus behind them, but oftentimes it's a letter of the law, like, which I'm sure you've dealt with dealing with police officers. Like, well, yeah, I mean, I get it, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but here's the definition of a duck.
Right. Yeah. You know, there's the letter of the law, but then there's also the spirit of the law, you know, like, especially when technology started to pick up, you know, there were things that technically, you know, the law was a little bit behind.
Oh, yeah.
You know, things that teenagers were doing on phones. And so I can remember very early having to make that call, like, yes, this meets the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law is not to punish young people making reckless decisions.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and that's where, like, the common sense part comes in too. So, you know, you're a professional, you study the law, you know, you have all your things in order, but you've got to take on what the spirit of the law is. And as a prosecutor here, we would present cases to grand jury. And one of the things, there was like, now Court of Appeals Judge Tony Lawrence hired me here at the district attorney's office back in 2014. And so when we would go into grand juries, he would always, you know, he would break it down, you know, there's these 3 questions you got to answer, you know, you're looking at the law, like, was a crime committed? Did this person commit it? And is this the right thing to do? That was always, you know, for those cases that were kind of on the line.
I mean, that's the heaviest question, it sounds.
Is this the right thing to do? And that's kind of, you know, that's the job as a prosecutor. Prosecutors are ministers of justice. And when I learned that, I was like, wow, you know. So that means justice sometimes is a dismissal. You know, when there's been a failure in maintaining someone's rights, sometimes people go free. But that's what justice is, right? And that's what makes our country so wonderful, that, you know, you hear a lot of talk about the rule of law and law and order, but it's supposed to ensure that everyone is treated fairly and equally without regard for who they are, where they're from, whether they're poor, whether they're rich.
Yeah, these are the rules of the game. You know, you've got to play by the rules of the game. One of the unique features of law, and American law in particular, because I don't have experience in law, but it seems that by design, it's this constantly updating and evolving product.
Well, precedents are what ensure that we're following the law and that we're not being willy-nilly.
By virtue of this, we should be doing
this. By virtue of this, we should be doing this. But there's also, you know, defense attorneys are the ones that get in there and make the objections and highlight issues if there are areas that need to be changed. So it's not that things can't change. You just kind of have to get the issue before the court in the right way. You go to law school, you learn about these certain cases that established certain things, and it's the law forever.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then it changes. And, you know, from a practitioner's perspective, you're like, wow, because I found myself thinking, well, how did they do this process? And even when you look at like Brown versus Board of Education and all the cases that, you know, led to the dismantling of segregation, there was like thought put into how to get those issues before the court. It just didn't happen by happenstance, you know. People put themselves in a position to create a situation so that they could change the law.
So what brought you back to Mississippi? You've talked a little bit about working for Judge, who was it?
Judge Jackson.
Judge Jackson.
Okay, so that's the simple answer. Love brought me to Mississippi. I fell in love with this man who was from Moss Point, got a job with Chevron. He proposed, and I was on my way. He came to Virginia, put my little stuff on the back of a U-Haul, put my little car on the tow dolly, and here I was on my way to Mississippi. And so when I got here, I didn't have a job when I got here. So I was admitted to the bar here. I didn't have to take the bar here because I had practiced law in Virginia for 5 years. So I still had to go through all the character and fitness and, make sure that I was morally fit to be a member of the Mississippi Bar. And once I did that, I was able to be admitted by motion is what they call it. But I applied for jobs, so I didn't have a job. And I was kind of in this weird place where I wasn't quite a Mississippi lawyer, so I was applying for jobs. And if you had an immediate need, I couldn't really practice yet. So I opened a law practice for a little bit. I met an attorney, Maxine Conway, in Moss Point. She had an office, and she said, you can rent space here for as long as you like. You can stay here forever. You can stay here until you get a job. You can come and practice here. So I thought, well, what better way to find a job than to get out there and practice law and go to where the lawyers are. So then that led to me getting a job with the city of Moss Point as their city prosecutor, which is a part-time job. So I was able to do that and then have my private practice as well. So I got on the guardian ad litem list and chancery court, which that's the lawyer that comes in and does, if there's like issues in a chancery case, which is divorce, custody, those types of issues, you are the attorney that's making a recommendation to the court as to what should happen with the child. So I did that. I got on the list to do mental health commitment docket, which those are the people who are either their family members, or we've actually done it from the prosecutor's office where they are in some kind of mental health crisis, for lack of a better way to describe it, and the court determines what can be done to help them. So I did that. Trying to think. So I did that for about 11 months, but I wanted to get back to prosecuting because I felt like I had found like my calling and my mission, and I was passionate about it. And so, but there were no jobs. Let me just tell you, like there were none. And so I was doing it a little bit. So every chance I got, like I've told now Judge Lawrence's story, I'm like, I borderline stalked you a little bit. Like if we were at a prosecutor's conference, I would always go up and say, hey, I'm Shon Ellerby. I'm in Moss Point in Jackson County. Just introducing myself again. And so eventually, there was 2 positions were added to the office by way of legislation. Shout out to Senator Bryce Wiggins for that one.
Okay.
And so it expanded the office. And so I had made friends with someone there, and she's like, we're going to have some openings and you need to apply. And I said, okay, well, where do I find the application? She's like, no, you need to come drop off your application. Or your resume. So I did. I put on a suit because I was like, just in case they see me, I was trying to just put the best foot forward. So I did. I got an interview and I got the job. And so that was kind of the start of my prosecutorial career here in Mississippi. And I did that up until January when I resigned to run for circuit court judge.
Okay. And then how long have you been a prosecutor in Mississippi?
It was a little over 7 years. So I've practiced law for 15 years. I've probably prosecuted for 14 of the 15. I guess I've been away from the DA's office almost for a year. So 13 of the 15. Okay.
What challenges do you see in Jackson County? Or Jackson, Greene? Who is it? Jackson, Greene?
Jackson, George, and Greene. Yeah. So one of the challenges that I think, so I've been somewhere else, and so resources are different here. Like it's a smaller area population-wise, and so what I saw in the prosecutor's office is that cases don't move as quickly as any of us want them to, but sometimes it's an issue of resources. So we have 3 circuit court judges. We have 4 court terms. They're 8 weeks long. The judges spend 6 weeks in Jackson County, 1 week in George, 1 week in Greene, and then they have motion days somewhere in between. And so, but a lot happens, there's a lot of work to be done. And then we have a small legal community too. So, we would look at who's going to be where and when, and then Chancery Court is in there too, having court up in George and Greene counties. And so you kind of got to share your resources and figure out how to work through all of that. And so we would always try to prepare victims. Like it might take a while to get to trial. I think we can work on that together, like as a team, like talk to everyone who's involved in the process to say, okay, how can we get our cases to trial a little more quickly? Because I think that leads to people trusting what happens in the system.
Oh, sure.
More, I also, one of the biggest challenges I think I faced was with mentally ill people who were found themselves in the criminal justice system. One of the things I would like to do if I'm elected is to establish a mental health court in our district, because I think I talked about drug court, veterans court, reentry court. I think those are some of the best tools we have to, one, maybe keep people out of the revolving door of the system. But it also rebuilds our communities because we're putting people back in who can now be productive, who can live on their own, or whatever it is. And then our communities are safer. So that's one of the biggest challenges I think I face, because you can't keep them in jail, but you want them to be safe. Like, jail's not the place. But if I let them out, like, do they have anywhere to go? Are they going to end up on the street? Are they going to be a danger to someone else? Or is someone going to harm them? And so I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges that we face right now as a whole, as a society, with mental health.
Well, I definitely agree. I mean, I would say resource allocation is probably the greatest challenge. I mean, there's no rational reason for criminality, and the idea that somebody can't have some sort of, again, underlying reason as to what led them to that pathway is just silly. I mean, I know many people who believe that the mental health case in this country is a sham, or that it's not that serious. It is that serious. It doesn't take. The mental health aspect transcends all other demographics. It doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are. If you're dealing with these issues, your propensity to commit criminal actions exists across all demographics. It's a universal truth.
Right.
So it seems that a mental health court should be part and parcel to common sense.
Sure.
So
and I think, you're right. It does transcend even on addiction side, sometimes people make choices. Sometimes people get addicted based upon medical issues, but it transcends all of that. Like, it makes everyone equal when you're fighting that battle. And so the way I see it is, okay, so the court has a lane and it can do everything that it can to make that better, but it's really all of us that have to work together, right? It's education, it's health. A lot of times mental health, it's access to health care, so that someone can get their meds. It's housing that's available, so when someone comes back from prison, that they have some options available to them so that they don't find themselves. And when you say that, I'm not taking away someone's like free will and their ability to make choices. But I think one of the things I've learned over the years is that sometimes people are just in some pretty dire circumstances. Yeah. And then they find themselves before a judge, and a judge can use that power to reroute them, can give them the opportunity. And that was a lot of times, with drug court, I'm like, I'm just doing drug court so I don't go to prison. Well, that's fine. Prison's a motivator. But in the process, they discover like, wow, I didn't know I could have a life this good. I didn't know my family, would trust me. And I ran into a lady this week at the courthouse, and I remembered her from being in drug court, Judge Jackson's drug court, but she looked different. Like, there was a spark in her eye. And she said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "I do, but you look good." I was like, "It's working. You are." And she's like, "I'm trying." I was like, "It shows, because before you even said a word, I could see the difference in your life."
In my experience dealing with people, encouragement is what people need. So little encouragement, and yet it seems like the hardest thing to give other people, honestly.
Right. I mean, because you hear what you're not doing well.
Yeah, and you're wired because of survival, to see the negative in everything, right? Because that's where all the danger is. Anxiety is a fear and danger response. So you're geared to see the things that could cause you danger that don't match. So, hearing encouragement. I mean, I was a manager for Wells Fargo, and we had this one kind of manager meeting, and I asked one of the other managers, I said, "Do you thank your tellers for being in balance every day?" He's like, "No, it's part of their job." And I was like, "Well, what are the consequences of them not being in balance?" It's like, "Well, runs the whole thing. It's a disciplinary issue. People can't go home, have to do the search, waste time and everything else." Like, man, don't you think you should be thankful for, saving you all that time? And again, I think we overlook those things, but, kids, especially adults, we all need this to a little bit of encouragement can go a long way. And who knows what edge some people are on to do something stupid, and maybe a little bit of encouragement could keep them on the right path,
That's right. That's absolutely right. I always, and I don't know where I learned this. I didn't come up with it myself, but I always tried to, when I became in a position where I was like a supervisor or someone's boss.
Responsible for other people.
Other people. I always tried to be positive and say, you did really well with that. Yeah, it's your job, and I don't have to tell you did really well.
But that's the point, is that you didn't have to tell them.
Right.
Right.
But what I realized is I ended up getting like a better product back because they felt appreciated. And I guess maybe because I worked jobs too, like it was nice when someone turned around and like noticed that you did something well or appreciated what you did. Yeah. So I tried to keep that, going forward, even if it's just saying hello, or thank you to the person that, empties a trash can, like we're all the same, and we're all trying to survive and be happy, and, and
we want to do well.
We do.
In a world full of 7 billion people, it is nice to be noticed. So, well, excellent. Okay, so let me ask you, what do you hope to achieve as a judge?
Okay, so I kind of alluded to them. So what I hope to do, and I kind of came up with this one word, impact, right? So the reason why I stayed prosecuting and I didn't leave when I figured out that I knew how to try a case or put a case together was I realized I was in a position to make positive impact on the system. And so I realized by me being there, I offered a perspective. I realized that I could change what people's perception was of prosecution by saying, hey, it's not just here to lock people up, but it's here to make change. And that's a credit to the bosses that I've had in the past, because they were people who were involved in trying to move the needle forward, progress forward, and make the system better. But that's just what I want to do. I want to have impact. I have 3 specific ways. That's with the efficiency, moving our cases more quickly, bring in mental health court program, just using innovation, using technology a little bit more than we currently do. Because with such a big district, I'm sure time can get thin, as it did when I was in the prosecutor's office. But I think we can use technology to help bridge some of those gaps and be a little more efficient in the work that we're doing. And then finally, I just want to make sure that whatever I'm doing is fostering an environment that everyone can trust and respect, because none of this works without the trust of the public.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
None of it. None of it. And so it's really about impact for me. It really is. I looked at when the time came to make the decision, I looked at my kids and I'm like, what will I say to them when they ask me, Mom, what should I do? Should I choose the unknown, kind of hard, scary thing, or should I just stay over here where it's safe? And am I going to tell them to do as I did, or am I going to tell them to do not what I did out of regret? And so I didn't want to have any regrets. And so that's what I hope to do. I think I'll bring a fresh perspective. I'm different basically almost in every way. But I think it's good, It
is good.
I think it's good, and it lends itself. I'll tell you this: I'm different in every way, and I promise that it'll be something like we've never had before.
Excellent. Well, I certainly see that, and just to foot stomp something, I think it's incredibly value for somebody to be from here to move away and gain some experience and bring that back. And we talked before the show, like that is the hero's journey, and it is the ability to leave, to become hardened by life experiences, and bring a hardened, more experienced person back to the home, back to the community, to fend off the dangers that are emergent that the current population never left to be hardened for. You know, and that's something that I think you bring to the table, and I think it's something unique in the people running for this position. Not that they don't have their own uniqueness, but that's something that they don't have. So one last question before we go. Do your kids get away with anything?
Yeah, I mean, they do. They do. I mean, they're still little, but gosh, like they know how to just like get up under you.
Don't they?
Like,
yeah.
Oh my gosh, and they can be so stinking cute.
Well, Shon, look, I've had a great time talking to you. Thank you for stopping by. How do people get in touch with you if they would like to support you?
Okay, so I have a website, ShonEllerby.com. I'm on Facebook. If you search just Shon Ellerby, I'm on Instagram. I have an email address, vote@ShonEllerby.com.
Okay.
Phone number is 228-220-4199. I will answer the phone and I will answer your questions.
Okay.
Yeah, and gosh, George County Fair is going on, so I'm up there this week. Next week is Jackson County Fair. Then we've got the Greene County Fair. So yeah, I'm out here in these streets.
Making them better, no doubt. Shon, it was a pleasure talking to you. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, bye everybody. That's it.